This is my ranking of the best Souls-like games I've played, based purely on my personal experience. Each game is placed from masterpiece down to trash, depending on how challenging, rewarding, and memorable the overall journey felt. Let's get straight into the list. Nioh 2 throws me into tough fights right from the start, and I keep getting defeated, but each attempt teaches me something useful. The combat feels very deep, with different weapons, stances, and yokai abilities that change how I handle every situation. I like how the game gives strong tools but also punishes every mistake, so I have to stay alert all the time. Learning enemy patterns and timing burst counters turns dangerous moments into chances to strike back, which feels really satisfying. There's also a lot of customization, letting me shape my character in many ways, though managing gear can sometimes slow things down. Even with that, the steady sense of progress and improvement keeps me playing, and every victory feels earned. This one clearly belongs in the masterpiece tier. Stranger of Paradise. Final Fantasy Origins starts off feeling a bit messy, especially with its story, but I kept going because the combat stayed fun and active. I like how it gives me a lot of freedom with different jobs, letting me switch playstyles and try new combinations whenever I want. The fights feel fast and aggressive, and I can experiment with abilities to see what works best in different situations. Some enemies can be tough, but the game is also more forgiving than other Souls-likes. The story doesn't really connect early on, but it starts making more sense later, which made the journey feel more complete by the end. This one settles into the good tier. Lies of P puts me into a dark, twisted version of a familiar story, and right away I notice how strong the atmosphere and world design feel. The city of Krat is full of detail, with different areas that keep things interesting as I move forward. Combat is all about timing, and I have to learn when to parry, block, or attack, especially during tough boss fights that demand full attention. I like how the game rewards patience and skill, turning difficult encounters into satisfying wins once I understand them. The weapon system also stands out, letting me mix parts and experiment with different styles. The story is clearer than most Souls-likes, which helps me stay connected while still leaving room to explore deeper lore. This easily secures a spot in the masterpiece tier. Rise of the Ronin begins with a strong setup in a historical setting that feels different from most Souls-like games, and I like how it mixes real events with its own story. The combat stands out the most, giving me a lot of weapons and styles to experiment with, and fights feel fast, skill-based, and rewarding when I get things right. I enjoy learning enemy patterns and using mechanics like counters to turn fights in my favor, especially during boss battles. There's also a lot to do in the world, from missions to side activities, though sometimes it feels like too much, and managing all the loot can slow things down. Even with that, the core gameplay stays fun and keeps me engaged through the journey. This one finds its place in the great tier. Another Crab's Treasure gives me a very different kind of Souls-like experience, replacing dark and serious tones with bright colors and a more playful world that feels refreshing from the start. I like how it still follows familiar mechanics like dodging, parrying, and fighting tough enemies, but presents them in a lighter and more creative way. The shell system stands out the most, letting me switch between different objects that change how I fight, defend, and move, which keeps things interesting throughout the journey. Combat is simpler compared to other games in the genre, and not as punishing, but it stays engaging because of how unique and fun each encounter feels. The world, characters, and humor all add charm without losing the sense of adventure. This one finds its place in the excellent tier. Black Myth: Wukong starts with a strong focus on action, and I quickly notice how smooth and responsive the combat feels during every fight. I like how it mixes fast attacks with careful timing, especially when managing abilities and deciding when to use spells or save them for tougher moments. The boss fights stand out the most, pushing me to learn patterns and adjust my approach instead of relying on simple attacks. The world also looks impressive, with detailed environments that make exploration feel rewarding even without much guidance. At times, technical issues and bugs can interrupt the experience, which can be frustrating during important moments. Still, the strength of its combat, variety of encounters, and overall design keep it engaging from start to finish. This one earns its place in the excellent tier. Wukong Fallen Dynasty quickly shows me how important timing is, especially with its strong focus on deflecting enemy attacks instead of just dodging everything. Once I start understanding the rhythm of combat, fights begin to feel smooth and very satisfying, especially when I successfully counter long enemy combos. I like how the game gives me different ways to approach battles, whether I play aggressively, focus on defense, or use abilities to exploit weaknesses. The morale system also adds something interesting, making each level feel like a steady climb in difficulty as I grow stronger. There are moments where the story and enemy variety feel a bit lacking, and the loot system can get overwhelming at times. Still, the fast combat and satisfying mechanics carry the experience from start to finish. This one earns its spot in the excellent tier. The first Berserker Khazan starts off extremely tough, and I struggled a lot in the early hours trying to understand how to deal with its aggressive enemies and brutal bosses. The combat feels heavy and demanding, forcing me to learn patterns, react quickly, and stay focused during every fight. I like how each weapon type changes the way I play, giving me different styles to experiment with as I improve. The bosses are the real highlight, acting as major skill checks that push me to adapt and learn from every mistake. The story and world feel a bit thin at times, and exploration is quite limited, but the challenge keeps me engaged. Once everything starts to click, the fights become much more satisfying and rewarding to overcome. This one lands in the great tier. AI Limit starts off looking like a typical Soulslike, but as I keep playing, it quickly feels very basic and lacking in depth. The combat works, but it doesn't really push me to improve or think differently, since most enemies and even bosses are easy to handle without much effort. I like the idea behind the sync rate system, which rewards me for playing carefully and staying aggressive, but it doesn't go far enough to make fights feel exciting. The levels and enemies feel repetitive, and there's not much variety to keep things interesting over time. The story also doesn't give me much reason to stay invested, and the main character feels very flat. On top of that, technical issues and bugs can interrupt the experience quite often. This one ends up in the mediocre tier. Nine Souls gives me a mix of Souls-like combat and Metroidvania exploration, and it stands out with its unique world and style right away. I like how movement feels smooth and responsive, letting me jump, dash, and chain actions together in a way that keeps gameplay flowing. Combat focuses heavily on parrying, and once I start understanding the timing, fights become very satisfying, especially during intense boss battles. The world design is detailed and full of atmosphere, encouraging me to explore and uncover hidden paths and upgrades. The story is interesting but feels a bit hidden, and the map system can sometimes be confusing to navigate. Even with those small issues, the gameplay and design keep me engaged throughout. This one secures a spot in the excellent tier. Where Winds Meet starts with a beautiful open world inspired by wuxia stories, and I really like how it captures that sense of freedom with smooth movement and stylish combat. Fighting feels more tactical than fast, with a focus on timing, managing abilities, and building combos in a smart way. I enjoy experimenting with different weapons and skills, especially when I find combinations that work well together. The world is packed with things to do, from side activities to small stories, which keeps exploration interesting at first. But over time, too many systems, menus, and constant loot management start to slow things down and break the flow. Technical issues and uneven pacing also hold it back from reaching its full potential. This one lands in the great tier. Lords of the Fallen begins with a familiar Souls-like structure, but it quickly stands out with its dual-world system that lets me shift between two versions of the same environment. I really like how this mechanic changes both exploration and combat, making me think more about how I move through each area. The level design is strong, with lots of interconnected paths, secrets, and shortcuts that reward careful exploration. Combat feels smooth and responsive, giving me different builds and playstyles to experiment with throughout the journey. There are moments where performance issues and bugs can get in the way, and boss fights don't always feel as challenging as expected. Even with that, the world design and core mechanics keep things engaging from start to finish. This one earns its place in the excellent tier. Stellar Blade starts with a strong focus on fast, stylish combat, and I quickly notice how smooth and responsive every fight feels. The gameplay relies a lot on timing, especially with parries and dodges, and once I understand the rhythm, battles become really satisfying. I like how new abilities and mechanics keep getting introduced, which helps the combat stay fresh over time. Enemy variety is also solid, and boss fights feel intense, pushing me to stay focused and react quickly. The world looks great, and exploration gives me useful rewards, even if some side activities feel repetitive after a while. The story and characters don't leave a strong impact, but the action carries the experience from start to finish. This one secures its place in the excellent tier. WUCHANG Fallen Feathers starts with some interesting ideas, but as I keep playing, it begins to feel frustrating and uneven across the whole experience. The combat has depth with different skills, weapons, and build options that let me experiment in many ways, which I do like. But the balance feels off, with some fights being too easy while others suddenly become very punishing without a proper build-up. Boss fights especially can feel long and exhausting, with very small windows to attack, making each encounter more tiring than satisfying in the long run. The story is also hard to follow, with characters coming and going without leaving much impact. Repeated trap moments and annoying surprises add to the frustration over time. This one falls into the trash tier. Code Vein starts with a strong anime style that immediately sets it apart, and I like how it builds a unique atmosphere with its mix of sci-fi and dark themes. The combat follows familiar Souls-like mechanics, but what stands out is the blood code system, which lets me switch classes anytime and try different builds without any penalty. This gives me a lot of freedom to experiment and adapt to different enemies and bosses. Having an AI companion changes the flow of combat, sometimes making fights easier, but also adding some unpredictability during tougher moments. The story is detailed and slowly unfolds, though it can feel a bit disconnected from gameplay at times. This one finds its place in the great tier. Sekiro Shadows Die Twice changes the usual Souls-like formula, and I quickly realized this game is all about mastering its specific combat style instead of creating my own. Every fight depends on timing, especially with parrying and managing posture, and once I start understanding that rhythm, the combat feels incredibly satisfying. I like how it pushes me to improve my skill rather than rely on builds or grinding, which makes every victory feel earned. The world design, movement, and stealth options also add more depth, letting me approach situations in different ways. Boss fights are intense and demand full focus, often testing everything I've learned so far. It's challenging, but it stays fair and rewarding throughout the journey. This easily stands in the masterpiece tier. Remnant II takes the Souls-like formula and mixes it with shooting, and I really like how well that combination works once everything starts to click. The combat feels smooth and satisfying, with a good balance between aiming, dodging, and using abilities at the right time. What stands out the most is the build variety, letting me mix different classes, weapons, and gear to create playstyles that actually feel different. I also enjoy how the worlds are designed, each one feeling unique with its own enemies, secrets, and surprises to discover. Boss fights are creative and challenging, often testing both my skill and my setup. The replay value is very high because areas can change between runs, which keeps things fresh. This one clearly belongs in the masterpiece tier. At the end of the day, this list reflects what stood out to me the most in terms of challenge and lasting impact. Some games left a strong mark, while others simply didn't deliver the same level of experience. Thanks for watching.